Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Off Script with Pastor Jared, and I have a special guest with me in the studio today. He goes by many names. Dr., Reverend, Pastor, Mateo, anything you like. He answers to it all. But first, to me, he was Dr. Akers. And so say hello to the good people.
Hello, it's good to be here today. I appreciate the invitation.
I had Dr. Akers as a seminary professor at Mid-America from 2011 to 2014, and he was a very kind professor to me, a great all-around guy. And I've got him in today because I want to talk about, well, I'm actually going to title this episode, The Modern Renaissance Man, because Dr. Akers, you are. Whether you think you are or not, you are an inspiration to millions. People look at you and I think, my goodness, how does this guy do all the things that he does? I mean, even back when I was at seminary, people talked about how much of a multi-talented guy you are. And you may think of yourself as kind of a nerdy guy, but I want you to know, people respect you because you're good at a lot of things.
Well, that's nice for you to say. I guess you could say also maybe I'm just a master of none. I try to dabble.
So I want to talk about a lot of the things that I at least know you do, and you can expand upon those things. But the four that I have that I at least know you do, you're a professor, you are a translator,
right?
You are a pastor,
yes,
and you're an author.
That's true also.
So I got to hit up all four of those things. So let's do a brief pass-through on those things. So professor at Mid-America, tell us what your current course load is. I want to see what it is compared to back in the old days, back when I was there, way back in the old gray, black and white days. So what's your current course load at Mid-America?
Right now, let's see. I'm teaching this semester apologetics and counseling. I'm also teaching current issues in counseling, Judges and Ruth, and teaching Introduction to Biblical Counseling, which I get to do every semester, which is a lot of fun, as well as a History of Missions seminar, and on Monday nights I teach in the Hispanic Institute.
Of course you do. That's the broadest course load. I think, if I remember right, you always had the broadest. Like, a lot of guys you'd pick, you'd be really down into one field, and then Dr. Akers over here is like one in Old Testament, one in the New Testament, one in a language, like just theology all over the place.
That's tended to be what I've done while I've been at seminary, is to teach in the different fields. So that's a lot of fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I remember you taught me, if I got it in my mind, at least I remember hermeneutics. So you've taught hermeneutics before.
I have, yeah.
I remember we did the Judges class. So you're still doing the Judges class? Still
doing the Judges class and throwing in Ruth for free.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was for free.
Yeah.
And we had, I think, an elective 2 Corinthians class. So you've taught that
right. That's
at least
right,
once.
Yeah.
And you were my New Testament Greek professor as well.
That's right.
So, and I would say the Greek was the struggle. If I had struggled in any of those, it was the Greek. But that's how are you such a broad studied person? How can you legitimately teach all of those classes and have that broad base? Because that's seriously impressive.
Well, I think you'd have to ask the students and see if they think, that it is a broad base.
No, I was there. You know what you're doing.
Well, I just like to read. And thankfully, the Lord has helped me to remember a lot of what I read, so that really helps. And so one of the big things, too, is taking extensive notes after I read, because I found that if you read something and then you take notes, if you do 2 or 3 runs through the same material, it really imprints well on your mind. And so that's one of the things that's really helped me.
Wow. So I'm sure people are taking notes on what you're saying, because if anybody could remember all the things you remember, it's amazing. So that's Professor Matt, all right? Then there's translator, Dr. Akers. So what's going on with your translation work right now? Because I followed you on social media and saw you've got something with New Tyndale. Is that right?
That's right. So really soon we'll be celebrating the 500th anniversary of his translation, which he never completed, and he did die for translating because that was something that was not popular at the time, to put the Bible into everybody's hands. And so this is a project that's honoring that. And so I will be translating 1 and 2 Samuel 1st and 2nd Kings, and as of a few weeks ago, I found out I'll be translating Genesis because the Genesis translator dropped out.
Wow.
And so that'll be fun. I'll serve as an editor for the historical part of the Old Testament as well. So in the middle of that, and that's not due until next year, so still working through the first draft, and we'll be editing soon to make sure that everything is as clean and as precise as possible.
I can't imagine the nightmare. How were you excited when they threw Genesis on you, or did you have to go scream somewhere?
I was happy, and here's the reason why. Each year, I like to translate through one Hebrew book of the Bible, and I try to pick a long one and translate 3 to 5 verses every day just to keep the Hebrew sharp. And so in the year 2020, I translated through Genesis. Now, it's only a handwritten copy, but that gets me a good start down the road. So I'm going to type that up, and I'll be ready to look at the second draft. So for that reason, I was happy. Otherwise, I would pull the little hair that I have left.
So I was thinking about, as you were reading off those books you're working on, you said Kings, Samuel, Genesis.
That's right.
Was there another one? Is that
No,
it?
those are the books. Yeah.
What is there any difference from a translation perspective, linguistically, on those books, or in your approach that you have to make?
Really, the main difference is different vocabulary. And so Genesis has an earlier vocabulary because of when it was written. And so it's more just understanding how words are used and which words are used. And so you see a different kind of account, when you get to 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, which really is a running account through a lot of history. And so it's more just the vocabulary that it uses.
What is your do translators have favorites? I don't know. Is that even a good question to ask? Do you have a favorite book of the Bible that when you've translated either from Hebrew or Greek that you just have the most fun?
One of the books that I really liked the most, I think, was Job, and I got more than I thought. Mm-hmm. But that was a class that I took in seminary, and so it was as an intensive because we had to have Hebrew intensives for the PhD program if we wanted to be in Old Testament, which is ultimately what I did. And the professor said, "Are you sure you want to take this as an intensive?" And I said, "Well, I need it." And he said, "Okay, fine." And then he told me later on that 40% of the vocabulary in Job is found nowhere else, and most of it is found only once. And he said, "So have fun."
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so that was a real stretch and a real challenge.
I bet.
Yeah.
So of all the languages that you know, we'll start with English, but what are the other? I know you do Hebrew and you do Greek, and obviously you speak fluent Spanish. So
right.
Is there anything beyond that?
Dabbling. I mean, for the doctoral program, we had to be proficient in German and Latin, which essentially means that you're just able to translate it. It doesn't mean you can speak it. It doesn't mean you have that kind of expertise.
You can work with
resources
and things like that?
That's right.
That's the main point.
That's the main point. That's right. So, and besides that, I studied Middle Egyptian in the master program for some of my language credits.
Okay. And
so it's been a while, and I'm pretty rusty, and it was only a term of that. So, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's so broad, though, that you have all of that. So, professor, translator, pastor, Nueva Vida here, and you guys still meet here at Kirby Woods? We still meet here at Kirby Woods, and we've been here for 18 years as a church almost. It'll be January when we celebrate That's 18 awesome. Years. So what's the founding date then, if you go back 18 years? It is 2005. The way I remember it is that I began pastoring in January, and the next week my daughter was born, and so I always remember because of her birthday. So you're the founding planter, is that the right terminology? That's right. I'm not the founder of the work at Kirby Woods. There were several who worked in the Sunday school several years before I even got here, but as far as the founding pastor, that's true. Yeah. So if you go back to the circumstances of the church being started, what was sort of the need that people were seeing? Why did it come into existence, and why through Kirby Woods? In 1999, when my wife and I came to Memphis, there weren't very many Spanish speakers here, and then that quickly changed. Fast forwarding to today, in the tri-state area, we probably have 250,000 Spanish speakers, but back when the church started, the numbers were really starting to grow. And I came because of my wife to the Spanish Sunday school when we came to Kirby Woods. Because if they don't know your wife, is she from Ecuador? She's from El Salvador, but it is an E. That's right. So that's pretty close. Okay. Yeah. But she's obviously fluent Spanish speaker. I mean, native Spanish speaker.
Right, that's right. And so her dad told me that if I wanted to marry her, I had to learn Spanish. That was the requirement. So I took him seriously, and I did. And so we thought, well, this is a great way to plug in and learn some more Spanish. And so we started with the Sunday school. There were a couple of teachers over time. Luis Quesada, I think, is the one who began it, and then Chris Galt worked with it until he went to be a missionary in Costa Rica. And then when he left, he said, hey, would you like to teach this Sunday school? And I said, okay, I hope I can. I think I can. And, of course, I was still learning, and my wife helped me a lot to keep growing in my Spanish. And then years later, I was approached by the pastors at Kirby to say, would you like to turn this into a church? Because there's a real need. So you can have a Sunday school like you have, and then have a church service. And so it was really their vision, and I happened to be here at that time. So they asked me, and I said, I think that's very important. That's a really good thing to do. And so, of course. And so here I am later, almost 18 years.
And were you teaching at that time at the seminary, or was this before that?
No, this was before that. I was teaching at University of Memphis for 3 years in the classics department and taught mythology. And so I think it was during that time when I was teaching at U of M as an adjunct that I began. Yeah.
Okay. I had no idea that you taught at University of Memphis. I just
3
uncovered
years,
something.
yeah.
Mythology. Wow. That's from a Christian. I would imagine that was an interesting class to teach.
It really was, yeah, and had people from all kinds of different backgrounds. I taught 4 to 5 sections a semester, and each section had 30 to 35 people in it, so there were a lot of people. And the reason why I taught that is because I knew somebody who was teaching those classes, and he had to move, and because I had all my Greek hours in my master program, they said, hey, Greek mythology's in this program, so hey, would you like to teach? And so I had an opportunity to teach, and so that was a lot of fun for 3 years.
You've just added to the Renaissance theme. It continues to build. The legend of Dr. Akers continues to build. So that's professor, translator, pastor, and author as well. How many? I know. I just saw one that came across. I picked it up, by the way, for our church library. The one Lord, One Faith.
One Lord, One Faith. Right.
So give me a rundown on that book, and then if there's anything else you got cooking,
okay,
let us know about that too.
Sure. One Lord, One Faith is a focus on the book of Acts and how the first believers realized that they had to be multi-ethnically united. And there were a lot of struggles. In fact, the first church struggle was over the issue of culture, and that's why they instituted deacons. Well, even before that, the Jerusalem Council was extremely important, but the Israelite women who spoke Greek, that's right,
yeah,
they didn't have their needs taken care of. They were overlooked, and so that was the same people group, but a different culture, because you had the Hellenist versus the Hebraist. And so that's why they instituted those 7 men helping with the needs. And so you mentioned the Jerusalem Council, which was the big one, which really for the church sealed the fact, after they studied Scripture, that God wants believers from all different backgrounds to be one in their faith. And that doesn't mean that we have the same culture, and it's okay to have different cultures, but that we need to realize that we have what I like to call unidiversity. So we have a unified faith, and we have diversity from our backgrounds, and just like the different parts of our body work together, they're different, but they form a whole. That's what the church is like with the different cultures. And so wrote that a few years ago, and College in Clayton was kind enough to publish that, and so that's been out, I think, for 2 years.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I picked it up. I want us to have a copy for here at Kirby Woods to be able to have our members check it out. So that's obviously a topic. Did you plan that topic around, or the release of that, when the world was going crazy over race, or did that is that something you were already working on?
It was something I was already working on.
Because when that came out, it was at the peak.
Right. Right. So that's a topic that had been in my mind for a while, and it kind of jumped out of a different book that I wrote. The first book that I wrote was on multi-ethnic marriage for Christians, and it's a counseling guide, because a lot of times people will get into a marriage and they won't realize the different ways that they don't necessarily line up, and they might have conflict they don't know about. And so, for example, when I was first married, what I do back home in Missouri, pick up a dish and smell it and savor it and say, this is wonderful. But in my wife's culture, it was, is there something wrong with my food? No, it's great. Well, you're smelling it like there's something wrong, because smelling food means I don't trust this food. And so different things like that over the years made me realize there are a lot of things that we can help people with who marry from different cultures. But because I'd written that book, which is entitled Equally Yoked, I thought, this would be a good follow-up to write about the topic, not only in marriage, but in churches.
Good.
Yeah.
You should write one for this is a joke at my wife Abby for Northerns and Southerners getting together. You need to write one of those because she's from upstate New York, and I'm from down south. So we've probably got our own book just waiting to be written. I'm
or it
sure.
could be a chapter at least.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. There is something to that though, being from different.
Right.
You're both North America, but still there's
That's
some differences
exactly right.
depending. Midwestern.
Yeah.
They have their own kind of. You're Mr. Midwestern, aren't you?
I'm Mr. Midwestern from Missouri.
I have repressed memories of you used to making a lot of jokes in class about Potosi, and
that's right.
And
you remember Potosi?
Absolutely. Yeah, you've got some country family, right?
I do. My family got there in 1805, and we stayed there, so most of my family's still there. So, and I found out this week I have to be careful how I pronounce my hometown, because I was at a mill, and a guy said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "From Potosi." And he said, "I've never heard of a town called Potosin, but it sounds dangerous." So I'm trying to enunciate a little bit better.
Helps those babies be born. Just
right,
keep it coming. So, any books currently in the oven, or at least in the mind, that you're working on?
2 books. One is Judges and Ruth Commentary with College and Clayton, which is with the publisher now. They're typesetting it, so probably should be out next year.
So that's done. You've finished that.
That's done. I just have to read the typeset copy and make sure no errors are in it. And but that's pretty much done.
Cool.
And before I came here today, I was working on book 4. It's in its second draft right now, which is a book about Carl F.H. Henry, who was a theologian, probably the preeminent theological evangelical mind of the 20th century. So the title of it is Renewing Evangelicalism. So it's the idea of how do we stay true to Scripture with our orthodoxy, but we make sure that we practice our faith well, which is our orthopraxy. So how do we do those two things together and be engaged in society in ways that represent Christ well?
So do you just have a love for Carl Henry? Is that why you picked him?
I read his book a few years ago, his seminal work, which came out in the 1940s, The Uneasy Conscience of Modern Fundamentalism. And I thought, wow.
That's an interesting title.
Yeah, it really is. And he wrote it because there was a disengagement of evangelicals and fundamentalists because of a worry of being corrupted by the world. They ran from the world. So he said, no, we're running in the wrong direction. And so that really started my interest in reading about him, because like Francis Schaeffer and some other guys, what he wrote about could have been written today, the exact same book, and you would have thought that it was written for the 21st century. It's just very modern in that sense of addressing the same issues. And so from that, I read a lot of his other works, and I thought, a lot of people don't know about him today. This is an important work to read. And so I wanted to introduce people to his thought and compress it down, because there are a lot of books out there, a lot of big books that he wrote, and just tie it to some things in the 21st century I think we need to be aware of and things we need to do.
Good. Yeah, that sounds good. Man. Now, what's the book that you don't have anything done on right now, but you want done before you die? You're the book that you want to write.
I think that I'd like to write a book in Spanish for Spanish speakers that has something to do with theology. What happens a lot of times is that books are translated from English, which is okay, but a lot of times they miss the nuances and the aspects of culture. And so I'd like to write something in Spanish for Spanish speakers sometime before I die.
Is there a Spanish-speaking Wayne Grudem out there? Do they have that equivalent of what we would say, has written the systematic theology that's just so commonly used?
Maybe not in North America. I mean, there are some writers throughout Latin America that write, but many times what happens even in Latin America is the books are imported and translated and imported. And so there need to be more writings out there
Yes.
that start in Spanish for Spanish speakers.
I ran into this just on a different language, but when we went on a mission trip to India, and I was able to, I struck up a great relationship with one of our translators, and I remember just thinking, I want to buy him a resource, because this guy is on his way. I mean, he's just a sharp guy. I could see him really growing and even pastoring. And I thought to he spoke Marathi, which is it's less than Hindi. So as far as representation. And I just remember thinking, what do I even buy him? I can't get him a copy of R.C. Sproul's, Holiness of God, which I'd like to hand him. That's not in Marathi. I can't get Wayne Grudem in Marathi. I can't. What do I do? And that was the first time that I really thought about, it needs to come from the language that they're speaking. So
That's
an
right.
author that from them that to really capture. Even if I wanted to give him something, I would have had to give him a Hindi version. I think Grudem had a Hindi version for an insane amount of money. You could buy Systemat in Hindi, but then that wasn't even his primary language.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, imagine there's probably this problem is all over every language.
That's right.
With theological works.
I think that's part of the discipleship process in missions, is teaching people who can raise themselves up through the Lord's help to write and to contribute in those ways. Same thing with writing songs in the language that people really attach to. And that's really something we need to invest in.
I was thinking about that too when I visited your church, Nueva Vida, a couple weeks ago and preached up there. They did a mix of songs that were some were songs that I recognize the melody for, and then some were they must have been written by Spanish speakers, because I did not recognize them. And I thought to myself, these flow, the ones written by the Spanish speakers flow much better than the translated English ones that you're trying to fit it to Mighty to Save,
Right.
And it's close, but it's a little clunky because it wasn't written for that. You change the words. They don't fall on the line the same way.
That's right. You have to squeeze some syllables in.
Yes, that's it. So there's a huge need for that stuff.
Really big need. And so I hope that's a need that continues to be addressed more and more in Spanish and other languages, as you mentioned.
Well, I think it's awesome that you're thinking about that, because it's the place where it intersects is probably so few, where someone they have a really good fluency in two languages and they're theologically strong to be able to do it. So there's probably not that many people that are both bilingual and theologically minded, or a great songwriter, to be able to do both of those things.
We need to really up those numbers, so I hope those numbers continue to grow.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things with so many multicultural people in the United States now. They come from two different ethnicities and cultures, or even more, that you have more Timothys like that. Mm-hmm. Like in the Bible, where Timothy was half Greek and half Jewish. So I think those numbers will grow, and that's exciting to see how people will be able to weave between different worlds and be able to produce those kinds of works.
Good. So those are your four things. Do you have a fifth thing that I don't know about that you do? Because those are the ones that I knew about, other than like husband, father, and those kind of things. But is there another big thing that you do?
Not that I know of. Those things take a lot of time.
That's my next question I was going to ask. So I'm now into the miscellaneous questions for you. How do you manage doing all those things? Is there a time management secret that you have, or do you just? Are you one of those people that don't sleep that much and it's just, you can just operate at a high level? Are you a high output guy? I mean, how do you manage all those things?
When I get started with something, it seems like it gets easier as it goes along, and that helps. But I think one of the things that's really important, and this sounds counterintuitive, is to rest well. Because if people don't rest well, they're going to run out of gas. And so it's important to rest well and have that good balance. And I'm thankful that my wife, if I'm not balancing well, is helpful in that she reminds me. But it's good to rest well, but I like to start as early in the morning as possible and just start working, and that really helps because it's easy to put things off. And so things that we put off, we don't always do well because then we try to rush into them. And one of the other things I try to do The things that I don't like, I like to do those first,
Okay.
even though I don't like doing them.
Yep.
Because that gets it off the shelf, and I'm not worried about those things as I'm doing other things. And so
I hear the voice of my dad saying, "Son, do the hard thing first."
The hard thing first.
Always heard that.
Every time, right. Do the hard thing first, and then just, be reasonable with what you can do. So I like to shuffle between projects in a day and have so much time for a certain project and so much time for another project, and just compartmentalize the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm going to work on this during this time, and this is my goal. But really, the big thing is to do at least something every day. And I think that's the key, especially I found to writing. If I've said with a project, I need to get it done by this date, that means every day, no matter what, I'm going to write at least 2 pages or 3 pages, depending on the project. And it's a first draft, so it doesn't have to be perfect. If I get 4 pages, that's great. If I get 5 pages, that's excellent. But I'm at least going to do this, and if that takes me so many hours, well, I'm going to have to invest that time. And so those little bits, I think, add up. So it's the old adage that people use, the way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And so those things add up. A lot of times we don't think about how things add up, but that's how they add up, by doing something every day.
As far as like the creative part of your brain, do you find it hard to switch in and out of those different modes of, like, you're working on stuff for Mid-America, you're in professor mode, and then you need to switch over to translator mode, then you need to switch over to pastoral, I got to go counsel somebody, and you got to switch over to, all right, time to write a couple pages for the book. Is it hard to get the different hat on, or is it something like one day I can do one thing, or can you pretty easily switch hats?
I found, thankfully, I can switch hats pretty easily, and it's almost like, a soundtrack, when you have the different songs that you have on a soundtrack and you can switch, and thankfully my mind seems to work that way, that I can switch pretty easily.
That's good. You must be one of those people where you can be in your left brain and then you're in your right brain, and you can just keep moving. I know for some folks that's not the case. It's like if you can do one thing, and it's actually hard for me sometimes when I'm to get into sermon mode, sometimes if I've been doing something else, or if I'm in music, if I'm in worship leader mode, and then I got to get over to sermon writer mode. And that's even on a smaller scale than what you're doing. But I mean, it's just, it's like there's sections of your brain that you have to be able to move back and forth between.
Right. Well, the sermons always are helpful because they're in Spanish, so that's like a clear break from English. And so the language break helps a lot. That kind of breaks that up.
Someone asked you this in class once, and I don't remember the answer. Someone asked it again. Do you think in English, and are there ever times when you think in Spanish?
Yes, I think in Spanish sometimes, and I dream in Spanish sometimes. And sometimes I've responded in Spanish in class when it should be in English. And vice versa. So I remember one time in Greek, I said, "This is an important concept. You need to remember también." And they're like, "What is también?" And I'm like, "Oh, sorry. Let me back up. It seems like I've switched a mode here." So
I can't imagine being able to go that freely in and out. So, all right, I have a question that I remember someone asked years ago, and I don't remember the answer. But do you think that you have the modern gift of tongues in the language sense?
Well, in the language sense of learning languages, I think God has gifted me to remember languages pretty well, and so they seem to come relatively easy, although any language is a lot of work and it's a lot of frustration for anybody, and it is difficult, but it seems like the Lord has blessed me to be able to learn languages fairly well.
Do you think, was there another language on your radar that you want to spend the time to get under your belt?
A few.
A few?
Well, I've got a book at home on Arabic. I'd like to learn a little bit Arabic. It's an analog to Hebrew, so a lot of the words are similar. Right. Okay. So they're both Semitic languages. It's kind of like Spanish and Italian.
Does it read right to left as well?
It goes from right to left.
Wow, okay.
It uses a completely different script, but a lot of the words are similar. In fact, there are words in Spanish that come from Arabic also, because a lot of Arabic speakers lived in Spain, and so there are a lot of words that are already tied into the language, which is interesting. And then I think it would be really interesting to learn Cachiquel or Quiche, which are Guatemalan languages, because we have a lot of Guatemalans in the Mid-South now.
Okay.
Right.
So what kind of language is that? Is that just a tribal, or is it dialect, or?
It's a language, pre-Columbian, and so it's one of the Mayan languages. And so
there's speakers
completely
for that?
different. A lot of speakers. Actually, in Memphis, probably there are more speakers for Mam than Cachiquel or Quiche. But I do some work in Guatemala at a school, part of a school board, and so they speak those languages in that area. But probably more Mam speakers. M-A-M is what that is. Not like mom as in mother, but
Right.
M-A-M.
Thank you for that. I needed that.
And so, and so there are a lot of people that speak that as their first language in Memphis as well, even beyond speaking Spanish. And so
maybe that's where you're going to write your systematic theology.
Yeah, in Mom.
In Mom.
I just have to learn it first, and imagine a few decades should be good to learn that.
You'll be ready to go.
Right, yeah.
All right. What's your most favorite seminary class to teach, and why? Ever in the history of your time?
That's really hard to narrow down. Can I give two answers?
You can.
Okay.
I'll allow it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I would say my favorite seminary class on one level are the language classes, to see people start to put things together and realize I can learn these languages.
Yeah.
And these languages are beneficial. So I think it's what any teacher likes is saying, you think this topic is difficult, you'll never get it, you're getting it. And so I like the language classes for that.
When you push yourself past that boundary. I mean, I had that boundary when it's just like, there's a moment in the first couple weeks of class where you're just like, I don't think this is going to happen. I mean, this is not good. And then somewhere, I don't remember where, you click over and you just think, okay, it's just hard work.
Right.
This can be done. And then you start to pull out those cool little nuggets, from,
That's right,
once you start seeing it for yourself in the New Testament, those Greek words, and they start to come to life. So I completely understand what you're talking about with that.
Absolutely, and that's part of the struggle. A lot of people struggle against themselves because they think they can't.
It is.
And that holds people back, right? And so I love to teach those classes. The other answer would be I really love to teach in the Monday Night Hispanic Institute in Spanish to Spanish speakers, because there's so much need for theological education in Spanish, and it's just great to see people who have such an intense desire to learn, and we're learning together.
Are those pastors coming to that?
Some pastors and some church members. It's geared toward a certificate program because there are many first-generation people who, because of working or other circumstances, didn't get an ability to go to college, and some of them haven't even finished high school because they had to work so their family could eat. And so it's gratifying to see people who really want to learn get to learn and to learn about theology and other topics.
Well, how often do you teach somebody that you feel like you're kind of having to push them over the hill, and then to see when you teach someone that clearly wants it, that's a different ball game.
Right. Everybody that's there wants to be there, and they've chosen to be there.
And that, as a teacher, that is really fulfilling.
It really is.
I know what you came for, and I'm going to give it to you.
That's right.
That's exciting.
Right. And we get to study a lot of topics, too. Since it is a certificate program, we've studied hermeneutics, we've studied interpretation, Old Testament, New Testament surveys. This semester, we're looking at an introduction to missions. Next semester is going to be marriage and family counseling, so that'll be exciting. So
cool.
we get to do a lot of different topics.
So it's like seminary in a box for them, basically.
Right, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And you do all of it.
So far.
Yeah. You need some help. You need somebody to come in and can we advertise for that now?
Sure, that'd be great.
All right.
If we had other helpers, that'd be great.
Yeah, you heard it. Okay. So what's your, you may not have an answer, but I'll ask it, your least favorite seminary class that you've ever taught, other than the ones I was in?
Well, I don't think I've had one because every class is different and every class is learning about something. And so I don't think I've ever had one.
Okay. I'll believe you on that.
Yeah.
Do you notice anything different in the students that you get today versus when you were starting? Or I know you've changed, but I'm thinking, do the students, is there a fundamental difference in the way students approach the material or their discipline or their work ethic or what they want out of seminary? Has there been a change?
Yeah, I think the biggest change is I can't make 1980s illusions anymore or 1990s, which is different. So I have students that were born in this millennia. They weren't born back in the 20th century. And so you say things like everybody should know, and they're like, what's that?
Yeah.
What's Transformers? And I'm like, oh, wow, this class is more than meets the eye right now because they're not getting any of this.
They're like getting up almost your kids' age, the ones that are coming in now.
Right.
That's hard.
Yeah, actually, some of my students are my kids' age.
Wow.
So we're fine as long as they stay off my lawn, and, I say kids these days several times a day now. But I would say one of the biggest differences is just some of the cultural shifts. That every generation we're moving further away from Judeo-Christian principles, and so there are people that don't necessarily have that when they come to school, and so it's exciting to see how they learn. Every generation has its pluses and minuses. I'd say one plus of this generation is that they're not so embarrassed if they disagree with the professor, I think. I say, I don't agree with that. I don't understand what you're saying. But then when they're convinced, they're all in. And so the dialogue is good.
Okay.
So they might not necessarily agree, but they're more willing to speak their disagreement. And then once they realize, oh, okay, I get it now, then they're all in. So I think it makes for good dialogue. What's
the if you had to pin down, like, what's the lunch table issues that the kids are concerned about right now? Like, I'm sure every few years the winds change, and what's the hot controversy to debate changes. Like one year it's Calvinism, Arminianism,
right?
And then the next year it's something else, and the next year it's something else. So what right now are the kids all into?
I think one of the big issues is just how do we engage society well? And how do we do that in a way that we speak truth, but we also are loving? And so we speak the truth in love, as Paul says. I think that's one of the big issues. And then you have those issues that always come around every few years. So you'll hear people talk about Calvinism or non-Calvinism. That's one that comes around every 3 or 4 years.
In seminary, that always stays relevant, right?
That's right. And so sometimes it's whatever blowout has happened. Also that's the big thing on Twitter, or the big thing. Well, not so much on Facebook. I'm not sure that anybody knows what Facebook is anymore. That's almost MySpace now in some ways.
So I want to do one more question, and I want you to go into a little bit of length on this one,
okay,
if you can, on the translation piece, because I find that really interesting. I would speak as if you're talking to your average Joe church member that really doesn't know what goes into making a Bible translation happen. So give them just what's if you pull back the curtain on your Bible, what's going into making a translation happen in any new you're doing New Tyndale, but
right,
it could be the NIV they're holding, or the ESV that they have. What is actually going on behind the scenes in the translation process to get that finished product into the pew with them?
Several steps, and the first step is getting people to agree to translate the books, which is important. You got to have translators if you're going to have that. But then on the translators front, the important thing is to understand the language as well, and also to have good resources for aspects of the language that aren't understood well. We have what's called hapax legomena, which means words that only appear once, or are very rare, or can be difficult to understand for whatever reason. And so it's developing a good understanding of the language, plus having those good resources to fill in the blanks whenever those walls are hit. And one thing that we also have with this project is we have people that we can talk to who are experts in the field and say, hey, what is your take on this particular issue? What do you think about this? So we have consultants that help, as well as comparing several English translations. How have different English translations translated this over time? What are the differences? How have they rendered that? And then on the English side, it's understanding the language well in such a way that it communicates to people, and so that it's not an antiquated kind of language that's used, and it's a language that speaks well to this generation.
How much are you looking? What's the Tyndale philosophy as far as what do they want from you? Are they wanting you to go word by word, like what we would say the NASB tries to
Right.
do, or are they looking for more of an NIV, thought for thought? What's their philosophy? And how does that change what
Right.
you do?
Well, as accurate as possible according to what the original says, but readable as well. And so it's both of those things. And so it's what I think about is the train tracks, that you have the 2 tracks that the train has to travel on, and you have to have both of those. Faithfulness to the original as closely as possible, and readability in the receptor language, in this case in English. And so that's the philosophy, is to be as faithful as possible and to be as readable as possible.
So are there any words that you've come across where you're just thinking, I don't know how to get this? You want to say this, but you also want to say that you're at a crossroads between the word that it really means versus the readable, and you have to make a hard call. How often does that happen?
It happens every so often. There are words that you think, is this the best way to describe this? Is this really what it's getting at? And I'm still in the first draft with all of my stuff, and so I try to write it like it'd be a finished product, but then I have that opportunity. I'll be going back through early this next year and then working through that second draft. So I'll really, where I've made notations, should I translate this way or that way, revisit this, that's when I'm going to narrow down a little bit more.
I remember one example you gave us back in seminary was it was the word, the Hebrew behind, I think it's something where God has a long nose, but in English it's like loving kindness or something, steadfast. It's one of those words that's like you would not think that was the word, or like trustworthy was to have a long nose or something like that. So how do you do when you get those moments when you're translating? How do you know when to go long in the nose, literally, versus to be like, no one's going to know what that means? So you write, what it means.
That's an interesting example, because with the long nose, it literally means he has a lot of patience.
That's it.
He doesn't have a short fuse. But when we think about a long nose in English, we think of Pinocchio, we think of a liar.
Right.
And so if we were to go literally, it actually would say something else. God has a long nose. It would almost sound like he's dishonest or a liar, which he's not. God is truth. So you look for something like God is patient, an older way to say that is long-suffering, but that doesn't really transmit as well today. So you have to look at a word that communicates as closely as possible, because that's an idiom. Mm-hmm. Just like if somebody were to say in the South, that dog don't hunt, and you say that somewhere else, people are going to be looking, what dog? Why doesn't this dog hunt? And so our idioms are some of the most difficult parts of our language. And whenever you run across an idiom in Hebrew or in Greek, you really have to give the understanding as closely as possible. So it does require some modification to communicate that.
How would you, console is what I'm looking for. You often hear people, when they see all these translations, they're actually concerned. A lot of average church members are sort of concerned by the amount of translations that we have. What would you say to them to kind of let them know you're in the process? This is actually a good thing. You shouldn't be concerned with the abundance of, because it's kind of presented sometimes as, well, look at, you can't even decide on one Bible. You got 1,000 translation options available. How would you respond to that as someone in the process?
I think it's helpful, at least every generation, to have several Bible translations that come out that really speak in the modern equivalent, how people speak, to really transmit and understand well. And that doesn't mean I'm against older translations, because I use a mix of older translations and modern translations, especially as I'm comparing for translation projects. But we have to understand that it is the original which is inspired, and translations, sadly sometimes, can pick up some of the translator, and so that's why we need to have multiple translations to make sure that we understand well what the original is saying, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And you could make the case that English words change.
They absolutely do.
The words that we used to use to make a translation may not fit anymore. I mean, we used to sing "Don We Now Our Gay Apparel," right? And that doesn't mean what that means anymore.
Right.
So words change.
Words change a lot, and they're words that we can use if we're reading them from an older translation that people will get a different idea. They don't mean the same thing at all, and so it actually moves against understandability. So that's always the big deal, is people understanding Scripture on its own terms, what it actually says.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. Yeah, I think that's. I would love to be able to be a part of something like that. I know I can't be. I just don't have the qualifications. But it's so exciting to think that you have. I mean, you have to have. It has to be gratifying to think that you get to participate in something that people may study and hold in their hands for 100 years. You know, to be a part of a Bible translation is a big deal. And
it's very sobering because it's God's holy, unchangeable, infallible word. And so it's, you better do this the right way.
Yeah.
You better be on your top game as you translate to make sure that you're adequately and accurately translating.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the way you study your Bible, whatever translation you use, the way you hang on every word and you look at and you check those words and you want to see what it says. I mean, and to think, I mean, you're in that. You're shaping the way someone sees the Word of God. That's sobering, but it's also really fulfilling too.
It is. It's both of those. Yeah, and there are examples of people that didn't take it so carefully. We see examples of older Bibles through the centuries where a word would be left out that completely changes it. I remember one, they didn't leave a word out, but they changed the word sin no more to sin on more. There was a Bible that went out, and the publisher was actually fined. This is several hundred years ago, saying, you're telling people to sin on more,
oh, wow.
And some of them are taking you seriously. And so, yeah, it's both of those, gratifying and sobering.
Mm-hmm. Well, man, I wish you the best, and that's a really great accomplishment that they reach out to you for that. When I saw it, I thought, man, that's just great. I love to see it. And there's a little bit of Mid-America pride in me that says I like to see one of our guys getting those opportunities to be able to do things like that.
And several faculty at Mid-America are on this translation project. So Dr. Van McLean and also Dr. Mike Spradlin are both translating books in the Old Testament. So that's fun.
That's a great testament for the school, and that's great.
Right. So we're excited to be part of the project.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered enough for the modern Renaissance man, Dr. Matt Akers. He's a pastor. He's a friend. I love him, and we're just so glad to have Nueva Vida here at Kirby Woods, and I hope you guys are around for many, many years to come. And, man, good luck and God bless on all your projects that you're doing. My head is spinning, but if anybody can do it, you can.
Well, thanks for having me here today. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Guys, thanks for listening today. Hope it was a blessing to you. Please subscribe, leave a review and rating for our podcast. Share it with a friend, and we will see you next time on Off Script with Pastor Jared.